Trump hits Russia where it hurts. Sanctions target Rosneft and Lukoil, Moscow's oil giants. Assets frozen. Deals blocked. Europe eyes frozen funds for Ukraine. Moscow warns of a painful response. The Kremlin faces a stark choice: endure economic pain or negotiate peace. The White House delivered what experts are calling a gut punch to Moscow's economy. In a dramatic policy shift, President Donald Trump imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, firms that together account for more than 5% of global oil output and nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports. The move marks a stark reversal for Trump, who just days earlier had planned a summit with Vladimir Putin in Budapest to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war. That meeting was abruptly cancelled, with Trump citing frustration over the lack of progress in peace talks.
Now is the time to stop the killing and for an immediate ceasefire. Given President Putin's refusal to end this senseless war, the Treasury is sanctioning Russia's two largest oil companies that fund the Kremlin's war machine. The Treasury is prepared to take further action if necessary to support President Trump's effort to end yet another war. We encourage our allies to join us in and adhere to these sanctions.
The sanctions specifically target the company's ability to access Western financial systems, freezing all US-based assets and barring American firms from doing business with them. Treasury officials warned that foreign banks and companies dealing with these Russian oil giants could face secondary sanctions, a move designed to ripple through global supply chains. Reacting to the sanctions, Putin declared that Moscow would never submit to pressure from the United States or any other foreign power.
This, of course, is an attempt to put pressure on Russia. But no self-respecting country and no self-respecting people ever decide anything under pressure. And, of course, Russia has such a privilege to feel and consider itself on this list of self-respecting countries and people.
Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova dismissed the sanctions as extremely counterproductive, arguing they send a negative signal for negotiation progress and claiming Russia has developed strong immunity to such restrictions.
We view this step as extremely counterproductive. It sends a bad signal in terms of reaching significant negotiation progress on Ukrainian conflict settlement.
One of Putin's allies, Dmitry Medvedev, went a step further. He said that Trump is on a war path and that Trump had fully aligned himself with insane Europe now. Medvedev, in a Telegram post, said,
"If any of the numerous commentators still had any illusions, here they are. The United States is our adversary, and their talkative peacemaker has now fully embarked on the warpath against Russia. Yes, he doesn't always actively fight on the side of Bandera's Kyiv, but this is his conflict now, not the senile Biden's. They will, of course, say he couldn't help but be pressured in Congress, etc. This doesn't change the main point. The decisions taken are an act of war against Russia, and now Trump has fully aligned himself with insane Europe."
While Moscow projects strength, experts suggest the economic impact will be significant. The sanctions don't just reduce revenue, they fundamentally disrupt Russia's energy export infrastructure. Experts suggest that the previous sanctions on smaller Russian oil companies like Gazprom Neft and Surgut forced Moscow to offer steeper discounts when selling oil, meaning less revenue for the Kremlin. But the Rosneft and Lukoil sanctions create additional complications.
I think Trump made it very explicit. He is getting frustrated and something needs to be done. He knows that sanctions and tariffs are some of the most efficient tools. He's just decided to employ them, again, in the hope something will be achieved.
Russian analysts, meanwhile, insist the sanctions won't have the intended effect. A senior analyst at the Russian National Energy Security Fund, Igor Yushkov, argued that similar measures failed in the past, with sanctioned companies simply creating complex chains of intermediaries to continue operations.
It is unlikely that sanctions will directly impact the country's budget. However, they may have an indirect negative effect. If a company earns less, it pays less in taxes. In the case of Rosneft, where the Russian state is the main shareholder, the company would also pay lower dividends. Nevertheless, this is unlikely to have a radical impact on either the state or the company.
Yushkov warned that removing Russian oil from global markets would inevitably drive prices higher, hurting Trump politically as American gasoline costs rise. As Washington tightened the economic vise, European leaders gathered in Brussels for their own high-stakes financial showdown. The summit's primary focus: using frozen Russian assets to provide Ukraine with a €140 billion loan, roughly $163 billion. The proposal, outlined by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in September, represents the most audacious step since the money was frozen in the early days of the invasion. Until now, the bloc had only captured windfall profits generated by Russian money held at Euroclear, a Brussels-based securities depository. European Council President Antonio Costa welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the summit as a future member of the bloc, announcing that a political decision would be made on the plan. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said he saw broad support for the measure. But the sticking point is Belgium. Most frozen Russian assets in Europe, approximately €185 billion held at Euroclear, are in Belgian institutions. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever demanded legal guarantees and risk-sharing arrangements before agreeing to any seizure plan. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz expressed confidence that a compromise would emerge, stating he shares Belgian concerns but believes de Wever wants a joint solution.
The Belgian Prime Minister and I have discussed this issue several times over the past few days and weeks. I share his concerns, but he is interested in finding a joint solution, and I therefore expect that we will make further progress today.
Ukrainian President Zelensky emphasized that Russia remains deeply concerned about the frozen assets decision, viewing it as a dangerous precedent that Moscow will have to pay for its aggression. He noted that a significant portion of any loan would be used to purchase European weapons systems.
I think that, of course, it's more tough sanctions on Russia. 19th package is very important, and of European leaders of EU, but American sanctions are also very important. And this is a good signal to other countries in the world to join the sanctions. You know that not only energy, we need shadow fleet, etc., and continue until Putin will stop this war. So these are decisions very important.
Moscow issued its own warning. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Zakharova threatened a painful response if the assets are confiscated, calling it outright theft. The Kremlin warned that anyone who misappropriates Russian assets will be prosecuted.
Any confiscatory initiatives from Brussels will inevitably result in a painful response. We will act in full compliance with the principle of reciprocity in international relations, based on our own interests and the need to compensate Russia for the damage caused.
With the sanctions and building momentum against Russia among European countries, it would be interesting to see where the conflict goes from here on. While Donald Trump may have cancelled his summit with Putin, he seems to have opened a different kind of confrontation, one measured in barrels, euros, and frozen bank accounts.